Okay, let's call the meeting to order then. I guess I see a list of people here. Maybe I should just read them off. Rob Harrington, Jay Sheffield, Lizzie Phillip, Nicole Farmer, Al Fusco. Let's see. B. Mannix, Travis Ewall, Mike Sweeten, and two people on the phone. Am I missing anybody?
Jason Morris, City Newburgh, is on the phone.
Okay, great. Anybody else?
Gary Spears,
Yes,
Town of Deer Park's on the phone.
Okay, great.
And this is Catherine Corliss from the MTA.
Great. Welcome. All right. So the first item on the agenda is an opportunity for public comment. So I will ask anybody if they want to have anything to say at this time. Hearing none, we'll move on to number 3, which is accept the meeting transcript from October 21st, 2020. Can I get a motion? Anybody?
Motion, Harry.
Okay, it's Gary, and a second. Okay, Julie, thank you. And is there any comment regarding the transcript? Okay, hearing none, I'll ask for a motion to approve. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Carried. Okay. Number 4 is the Transportation Improvement Program, and I would just ask any of our project sponsors if they'd like to give an update on their particular projects. Is my cousin Jacob on the line here? No? Does anybody have any updates on projects, local projects?
Harry, this is Travis Ewald from DPW.
Yes.
For our Bridge New York project, Highland Avenue over Wall Street, we just received final design report approval, and we'll be moving to detailed design right-of-way acquisition. We expect that project to be let out at the later part of 2021.
Great.
We also have the PSAPS project where we recently finished addressing the comments and are waiting design approval on that. And we're anticipating to let that project late spring 2021. Heritage Trail,
Yeah.
the portion of the trail from Hartley to Ryerson is complete and open.
What's the status of the part of the Heritage Trail where you have to go across 84?
We had a meeting, the Parks Commissioner and myself had a meeting with DOT, and we are attempting to work with them and the town of Wawayanda to facilitate a temporary connection while they are performing their reconstruction of that bridge for 84. But there will definitely be periods of closure for both McVeigh Road and that trail. And then when the 84's project is all done, they will be relocating and reconstructing the portion that goes under I-84. And then the next section, which basically goes from I-84 to Palmer Avenue, that is essentially done. There's a couple of just minor cleanup items, and then the contractor will be finishing the remainder, which is from Palmer to East Main Street in the spring.
Good. It's good. Okay. Does anyone else have a project they'd like to give us an update on?
Yeah, this is Al Fusco. Since Jacob isn't on,
Right.
I am working on the construction management plan, and this project is planning to go out to bid in January. We just finalized some specs, and we all really appreciate all the help that the Orange County Transportation Council and you folks have given the project. Thank you.
Is Mr. Farr on the line?
Excuse me?
Is Mr. Farr on the line to talk about the bridge work over in Port Jervis? I guess he's not with us today. Okay, anybody else? Is there anyone else who wants to give an update on a local project? Okay, going once, going twice. We'll move on to old business. Does anyone have any items under old business they would like to discuss? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to new business. And new business includes the Connect Mid-Hudson Transit Study, presentation by Project Findings. And I'll ask Ashley if you give an introduction to our speaker.
Sure, thanks, Harry. So the Mid-Hudson Valley Transportation Management Area began the Connect Mid-Hudson Transit Study in 2019, and we hired on Foursquare Integrated Transportation Planning as our study consultant. And so the study was looking to identify opportunities to improve transit connections between the 3 counties in the Mid-Hudson Valley area, as well as between the 3-county region and the major employment hubs outside of our region. And today we have Boris Polchek from Foursquare here to present the project findings and recommendations. And Boris is a senior transportation planning and project manager, and he has over 20 years of transit planning experience. So I'll ask Boris to share his screen and begin his presentation.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. Thank you. Let me know when you can see it.
It's up.
Yep. Okay, great. Okay, so as Ashley mentioned, this is a study that we've been doing since 2018. So we're kind of getting to the end of this project now. And as she mentioned, the main point of this study was to identify these opportunities to improve transit connections between the 3-county region, or within the 3-county region, as well as between the region and other hubs, including New York and Albany. So the key areas of analysis that we looked at here were focusing on the effectiveness of regional services, a review of the service performance and customer satisfaction monitoring, opportunities for new technologies and service models, and capital improvements. Let me just, 1 second here. Okay, so since this study began before COVID, I just want to note that the recommendations do reflect the changes in travel patterns that have occurred since the pandemic, and we'll kind of begin with that. So since COVID-19 began, travel patterns have changed significantly in the region, as well as nationally. So by April 2020, most transit operators in the region had suspended or significantly reduced their service. The service began to ramp back up in June of 2020, but at different paces for each agency and each operator. So in September of 2020, just as a kind of an example of what the travel patterns look like these days, the Metro North ridership was down about 75% from the same period a year ago. So I believe that's still the case. Metro North we use as a good kind of example of the general trend in the region, because it is such a big player in the regional commuting market. The data collection, as I said, occurred before the pandemic, and we believe that the long-term commuting patterns are going to resemble the past patterns more than the present ones, but at lower volumes. In other words, what that means is New York and Albany will remain kind of key destinations, key hubs, because they're key financial hubs, key employment hubs, key cultural hubs, key government services hubs. So we believe that those destinations will remain kind of the main commuting patterns in the future, but at lower volumes overall. The biggest kind of change that we do see going forward is the role of Stewart Airport in the region. So the role of Stewart Airport, we believe, will shift and has already shifted from kind of this key passenger gateway to New York City, more toward a cargo hub, a major cargo hub, to support the increase in shipping. So what that means from a regional trip perspective is likely more intra-regional job access trips. So people going to and from Stewart for local jobs, and fewer trips between Stewart Airport and New York City. That's how we kind of see the biggest sort of travel pattern change once things get kind of back to normal. So the approach that we took for this study is to try to address kind of three or to try to understand three key kind of data sets. One is the market for transit service. Two is what's happening today in terms of the actual service on the ground. And the third data set that we looked at to really help inform us and understand the mobility issues in the region is what are stakeholders saying. So we'll start with the stakeholders first. So at the start of the project, we did a online survey that was publicized through press releases and 12 pop-up events. You see some images of those. We went to park and rides, we went to regional malls, we went to universities, and we encouraged people to take the survey online. We had a fairly robust response rate. So we had almost 1,300 surveys that were submitted. 75% of the people that submitted the surveys self-identified as riders. Close to 25% said that they were non-riders. So the aim of the survey was to help our team understand, as I said, the kind of mobility issues, how commuters are interacting with the existing services, and give us a good sense of the issues that are impacting them. However, even though we got 1,300 responses, we can't say necessarily this is a fully representative sample of area commuters or area residents, because it was a self-selected cohort of people that took the survey. It wasn't sort of like going door to door and asking people like in a census environment, asking everybody. So it was somewhat self-selected, but nevertheless, it gave us a good sense of some of the mobility issues that people were facing in the region. So I'll start with kind of some highlights about what we heard from the survey in Orange County specifically. So one issue was parking in Orange County. The Chester Park and Ride came up as an area, a park and ride with limited capacity that forces people to park in an adjacent lot at Lowe's. Again, this is pre-COVID, so some of these issues may not be as acute today, but nevertheless, this is an issue that we heard in the beginning. Reliability and customer service, that was another issue that came up from a couple different perspectives. Number one, Coach USA riders did tell us that they had sort of a desire for more oversight of the service to help address a range of issues, including missed trips, poor communications with the company, especially when there were service delays, lack of destination signs on the buses, and just some difficulty interacting with the drivers. And we'll get a little bit more into that on later slides. Also, there was some desire for better security at the Newburgh bus station, better lighting and better security. A lot of those trips occur very, very early in the morning, so it's very dark still at the lot. So that was an issue that came up in the public survey. As far as the routes themselves go, so there was a desire for additional express departures from Manhattan after 6 p.m. The schedule at the time was that if you couldn't get on the 6 p.m. Direct trip from Manhattan back to Newburgh, and it was very common that you couldn't because it was a very popular trip, the next trips after that departure were not direct, so that would require people to endure a longer trip if they couldn't get on a bus by 6 p.m. So those are some of the items we heard from the public. Then moving on to the market analysis. So what we found in the market analysis was that the top commuting destination for Orange County residents is actually within the county. So 48% of commuting trips are actually internal to the county. These kind of trips are best served by local transit service rather than kind of regional express type service. When you talk about local service, density is really the key to supporting local service. What that means is the more people and jobs there are in close proximity to one another, the better local transit service performs. We kind of use a rule of thumb of 5 people or jobs per acre, which is the recommended density to support local fixed route service. On this map in Orange County, you'll see that there's a number of communities that have, there's sort of pockets of density that can support local fixed route service. Newburgh, Walden, Montgomery, all these communities are the ones that you see here that have yellow and red on the map. Those are the communities that do have the density to support fixed route service. When we look at commuter service, density is less important. It is still important in some ways, but it's much less important than having a commuter service that meets the so-called pain points of commuters. So what that means is people tend to gravitate toward commuter service when it addresses things that they're trying to avoid, like traffic congestion, parking costs, travel time, excessive travel time. So they're looking for alternatives to all of those things. So what this map here shows, we compared the major commuting patterns that are independent of mode. So in other words, regardless of how people travel on their commute, we used what's called it's a data set, LEHD data set from the Census Bureau that allows us to see how many trips there are between municipalities. So that can be, for example, from Montgomery to one of the boroughs of Manhattan, or from Montgomery to to Poughkeepsie, or any kind of combination of municipalities. And so we used 500 trips per day between municipalities as our threshold for defining major commuting trips. So in Orange County, virtually all of the major commuting trips were served with direct and fairly frequent peak hour service. There were a few exceptions. So the few exceptions were, for example, the West Point area to Manhattan. That area was served with direct service, but it was very infrequent at the time. However, now it's been completely suspended. So that service is one of the gaps in the commuter availability. The other gaps are from Newburgh, trips to both Poughkeepsie and Fishkill. Those required transfers, so they were just indirect trips. Okay. Now, as I said, that pain points are what drive people to use transit, but pain points can also drive people away from using transit. So when it comes to commuter service, things like poor on-time performance or limited parking availability at popular park and rides, those can serve to, people may try a commuter service and run into these difficulties, and they may say, okay, this really isn't for me. I'll just drive, or I'll do something else. So in Orange County, there's a number of locations where there, at least pre-COVID, there were traffic congestion hotspots that impacted the on-time performance of buses going through those intersections. There were also a number of park and rides that had capacity issues, that people were not always able to find parking when they wanted it. So that includes Monroe, Chester, Tuxedo, the Central Valley Park and Ride, and the Curious Joel Park and Ride. So you can see those on this map here. Another kind of unique thing about the Mid-Hudson Valley region is the role of the commuter providers. So in order to identify pain points, those pain points that I mentioned, it's necessary to regularly monitor transit service and to regularly investigate customer complaints. But in the Mid-Hudson region, you have the situation where you have private carriers who receive operating assistance through the statewide Mass Transportation Operating Assistance Program, the STOA program. So they're private operators. They receive public subsidies, and they do submit reports, but they're very high level reports, and they're sort of too high level to really be actionable in terms of monitoring service effectiveness and customer satisfaction. And so it's a situation where the customers that we heard from in the survey, they these operators sort of self-police themselves when it comes to customer service, and that sometimes doesn't work out so well from the perspective of the passengers. So next we'll talk about the recommendations, but I'll pause for a second to see if there's any questions about the key findings.
Yeah, I have a question, Boris. You mentioned early on in your report about Stewart Airport and that the focus may be in the future more cargo than passenger. And I'm wondering if that's really what the Port Authority is thinking, because they've just invested in the building of a international building, rivals building. And also the Norwegian Airlines was a big success until that 737 issue occurred. So when you talk about that being more of a cargo-driven airport, how do you account for those other phenomena?
So it's sort of a function of what's happening now with COVID and the travel and sort of the new patterns that are being established, and some of them may stick around. In other words, airports in the New York region in general may end up being somewhat less utilized in the future because trips that used to occur, business trips, for example, that used to occur face-to-face have now been taking place virtually via Zoom. That's a pattern that may remain for years to come, even after coronavirus is dealt with. There still may be this, acceptance of virtual meetings as something that it becomes more commonplace. If that reduces the capacity of all the airports, or not the capacity, but the utilization of all airports in the New York region, it may be less. The airlines may find less reason to, push out some of their trips to other airports, like Stewart Airport. And so because of that, we kind of foresee that there may be a reduced demand for many years to come. It doesn't mean it won't come back someday, but in the near term. And then conversely, you also have the situation with the cargo operators. They've been setting, they've been setting up more and more operations at airports like Stewart, and e-commerce and things like that are probably not going away after coronavirus goes away. So it just may be that there's more cargo activity than passenger activity moving forward.
Well, cargo is a natural for Newburgh and for the Montgomery area. I mean, the warehouses are popping up all over the place. Our trucking establishment is already well in place. But the experience with Norwegian Airlines was really more tourism related. Mm-hmm. And people were coming here not to do business, not to have meetings, but to visit Woodbury Commons, to visit New York City, and vice versa. People from Orange County and the area region were going to Ireland for visiting tourism. Right. So I was wondering if that is a component of your review, tourism versus the cargo.
Yeah, it's sort of an indirect. It's an indirect relationship because as the other airports have increased capacity, as most of the people that were coming in on Norwegian Airlines were heading toward, New York City, toward Manhattan. And if there's an opportunity for them to fly more directly to Manhattan, that may be preferable. And if the capacity at the other New York City airports remain somewhat reduced, there may be more opportunities for some of the low fare airlines like Norwegian to find landing slots in those other airports. It's not obviously it's not guaranteed, nothing is, but that's sort of the assessment that we made while writing the report.
Okay, just one other point that you made in your earlier presentation about the bus station in Newburgh. Who is responsible for that station?
So let's see. The station, I believe, is maintained both by NYSDOT and the county. Am I Rob? Can you weigh in on that?
It's so the station is, the land is Thruway land, I think. The state, it's the state park and ride lot, but Coach is responsible for the building itself.
So then any security or lighting or issues in that regard would be on Coach?
With the building, with the parking lot, but the parking lot was just redone within the past 5 years. I think the parking lot DOT gets involved because it's technically their lot. That's my understanding anyway.
For the lighting and for the security, it has to be enhanced.
If it's enhanced, it winds up coming through. Coach can do it. Traditionally, Coach has done it, and then it's charged back to us, and we reimburse them with the federal dollars that we have.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Boris. Does anybody else have any other questions to Boris at this time? Okay. Take it away, Boris.
All right. So the recommendations will kind of work in reverse order. The last item that I talked about was the situation with the private publicly subsidized yet private operators sort of policing themselves. So one of the recommendations for this that we came up with is a transit ombudsman position. So an ombudsman is sort of a public advocate charged with representing the interests of consumers or taxpayers by investigating complaints related to publicly funded service. So in this case, transit. So the publicly subsidized private operators, like I said, are overseen by NISDOT, but the agency really has limited staff and limited resources to examine customer complaints in really a meaningful way. And so the operators, like I said, are largely policing themselves. There are examples of these transit ombudsman positions in other communities, both in the US and abroad. In the Seattle area, King County has an office of ombudsman that with various sub offices that are responsible for different kind of topics, transit, public health, voting, things like that. And then in Australia, in the Australian state of Victoria, there's a public transit ombudsman position that is that sort of manages over a number of private operators that provide the local and regional transit service. So in addition to serving as an advocate for commuters, transit ombudsman can fill other roles as well, including service monitoring and reporting. And like I said, pre-COVID, there were a lot of issues with on-time performance and with park and ride utilization. That's something that it has been monitored in the region, but not necessarily as frequently or as regularly as it could be. So an ombudsman position could have that responsibility. They could also participate in service planning and mobility management. So for example, they could present regular reports at TMA meetings. They could be the point of contact for businesses or any trying to move into the region and to try to understand what all of the transit options are. They could be kind of this repository of transit information for the region. So we recommend creating this ombudsman position as an advocate and as sort of a planning resource as well. The next topic is information. So passenger information and mobile payment. So in the past, I'd say 2 decades or so, transit agencies have really pioneered the development of transit-specific apps to allow users to plan trips and track vehicles from their own phones or iPads or whatever they have. The trend now, though, in the industry is to move away from having these in-house apps and instead moving toward an open source model that allows private developers to take the lead in developing these apps. And that allows the transit operators to focus on their core business, which is providing the transit service and even in some cases managing the data to make sure the open source data to make sure that it's up to date and accurate, but not really getting involved too much in the development of the app itself. So many transit agencies are now moving away from the in-house app model. Baltimore, Boston, LA, Montreal, all these large agencies have moved away and they're focusing just on ensuring that their data that's open source is accurate and up to date. So the main benefits of this approach, of this third-party approach, is that it simplifies multimodal trip planning for the user, because unlike the model where the agency provides its own app and the agency features its own information, the open source third-party apps allow for information from multiple providers, and including even non-transit providers like scooters, microtransit, and so on. And those are all incorporated onto one platform. So it makes it much easier for users to plan multimodal trips. These apps increasingly also include features like mobile fare payment, but that does require a closer relationship with the companies. These are the 3 biggest third-party apps that have emerged in recent years. There's the transit app, Move It, and Citymapper. If a transit agency or a transit operator makes their information open source, they don't really have to have any other relationship with any of these, because they essentially will pull open source data that's available online. They'll pull it and integrate it into their own apps. You need to have a closer relationship, though, if you want to do things like mobile fare payment, because that requires kind of a back-end connection to transfer funds and so on. So that can evolve over time, but in the short term, just making your data available through what's called a GTFS feed, it's General Transit Feed Specification. That's what allows information to show up on Google Maps and things like that. That's enough to get data up on these third-party apps. So this is another role maybe for the ombudsman position, where they could coordinate a regional participation in ensuring that all the transit operators that do operate in Orange County and the 3-county region have up-to-date information, and it's all available open source for these apps to pull, and maybe eventually moving forward to form a closer relationship so other features can be incorporated. The reason I say eventually, yes.
Just real quickly, on these apps, are you able to pay for like parking? If you like drive your car to the train station, can you use the app to pay for parking at the train station?
I believe in some of them they do have that feature, not all of them, but it is possible. So you can pay, for example, on some of them you can pay for scooter share, you can pay for a bicycle share, like the city bikes in New York. Those are now integrated. I believe that the transit app does allow for parking payment integration as well. It's something that I'll have to look into, but I'm pretty sure at least one of these three does allow that.
I know when I used to manage the village of Bronxville, we had Pay and Go. Have you heard of them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you were able to jump on a train and then using your smartphone, pay for the parking while you were driving to Manhattan.
Right. Yeah. So the reason I say eventually for closer integration is because several of the regional transit providers have recently signed contracts with different developers for their own apps. And so it'll take some time for those contracts to mature and expire. So if eventually the best approach is to have sort of one regional contract with one of these apps that can incorporate things like payment of fares, payment of parking, all that on one app. But it'll just take some time for the existing contracts to work their way through.
Boris, this is Rob. I just feel like I need to mention here that since this study started in 2018, Orange County's developed an open source app that brings in all our different providers, and we debuted it right before COVID, so that was perfect timing for that. But I'll move on. But if you go to ridetransit.orange.com, people can get an idea of what our trip planner looks like, and it doesn't have, like, to Harry's question, it doesn't have parking in there yet, and it doesn't have everything in there yet. We started with our basic local fixed route and our dial-a-ride services, and we're slowly increasing different things that are on that app. But it's not an app, it's a website, to be fair, but it's ridetransit.orange.com if people want to check that out, and we continue to improve that as we move forward.
Right. So the one thing about that, I think that's a good model, Rob. These guys, though, they've become national and international, in fact. And so if a person arrives in a community and they've never been there before, but they have an app like Transit on their phone, it automatically using geolocation will push to them all the transit options that are available in that community, versus having a situation where you have to think, okay, I'm in Orange County, what app could I possibly need to figure this out? And you have to find the Transit Orange website and so on. So that's kind of the benefit, the multimodal, and also the passive nature in which you just arrive and it works, versus having to actively go looking for something. So
no, I definitely agreed, and I appreciate you raining on my parade. No, I agreed. I'm just saying we're moving in that direction too. So
yeah,
I just felt the need to mention that.
Got it. Okay, so the next sort of technology/service recommendation is something called microtransit. So microtransit is a technology-driven demand response service model that allows riders to directly request vehicles in real time through a smartphone app. So this is a model that is being adopted in more and more communities around the country and around the world. The closest example would be in Albany. They recently launched a service called Flex by CDTA. The microtransit is a very versatile solution because it can provide both local coverage and regional first and last mile connections. So what that means in Albany, for example, this is the zone that they've designated for this service. It's a zone that they've found historically to be difficult to serve with fixed route service because of some of the demographic things that we talked about earlier, like the density. It's not a very high density area, it's not a very pedestrian friendly area, it's not very walkable. So fixed route transit service doesn't operate that great. So they have designated this zone. There still is some local service and regional service in it. So the microtransit vehicles can be used to travel within the zone, but also to make connections to regional service. The technology and user interface of microtransit is very similar to what people have become accustomed to with Uber and Lyft. But the main difference is that it uses a set fleet of vehicles. Whereas, with Uber and Lyft, you never know quite who you're going to get, what driver you're going to get, and what training they've had. With microtransit service, you can really control the branding and you can control the vetting of the drivers and the training of the drivers much more closely. Microtransit also allows you to kind of right size your service, your transit service. That could mean right sizing because you have a lower density area, regardless of the current situation with COVID, but it also is an opportunity to, because ridership has fallen in many markets due to COVID, it also allows you to right size with the current demands as well. So this is what microtransit looks like as a technology. We identified a number of opportunities within the 3-county region, including in Orange County, for microtransit service, and we'll get into these in Orange County in more detail in a second. But generally speaking, the zones that we identified reflect the findings of the market analysis and the service analysis that we talked about earlier, as well as stakeholder input. And the zone boundaries at this point are very approximate, so they could change, with additional assessment, additional analysis, and additional zones could also be considered in the future. So we don't have one shown in Port Jervis, but that could be considered in the future. So I'll talk next about these 4 specific zones in Orange County. The first one is what we're calling the Highlands West Point microtransit zone. So prior to COVID-19, Coach USA did operate 4 trips a day and 5 on weekends between New York City and Highlands. So really they were serving West Point primarily. The service is currently suspended due to the coronavirus. If this became a microtransit zone, it would facilitate local trips within the Highland Falls area, West Point, Fort Montgomery. It would allow for local mobility, which really the Coach USA service never really did. But it would also allow for regional connections to places like the Port Jervis line. There's a rail station in Harriman that people could access. So, that first last mile connection, if they got to there, they could get to West Point. Woodbury Commons, same sort of situation, but with bus service. So Coach USA has stops at Woodbury Commons, so that would allow people to make connections to both regional bus and regional rail. The next zone is in Orange County. The next Orange County zone is the US 6 and 17M corridor. So this is a kind of a large zone that encompasses a couple of corridors between Middletown and Harriman. It also includes the towns of Goshen, Chester, Kiryas Joel, Monroe, Walton Park, and Woodbury. This would provide, again, that increased local coverage because Coach USA did provide service on the main line. And actually, I believe the main line is now back up and running, but it still doesn't provide quite the extent of local service that microtransit service could allow for. So it would serve key employment hubs like Amy's Kitchen, Legoland, Woodbury Commons, and Harriman Station, as well as several regional park and rides in Chester and Monroe. So it's that combination of improved local service plus regional connections on demand. Okay, then we have another zone that we're calling the West of Newburgh zone. So this is another area where there was service prior to COVID by Coach USA. They provided kind of east-west service between Newburgh and Middletown, but that's been suspended. And so this service would facilitate local trips, both local trips in all these communities, as well as job access to Stewart Airport, where freight volume is growing. The zone will also provide for multiple transfer opportunities, including to the Newburgh Beacon Stewart Shuttle and Newburgh local service along the 17K corridor. Also the Coach USA service to New York City from the 17K park and ride, and Port Jervis rail service at Salisbury Mills Cornwall Station. And then the last zone in Orange County is actually a Orange/Dutchess County zone, the Beacon Newburgh microtransit zone. This could help fill a gap left by the suspension of ferry service between Newburgh and Beacon due to coronavirus. It could also gauge the demand for microtransit, or sorry, for the Cross Hudson service when making the decision of when to start ferry service back up. Microtransit is a very data-rich service because all of the trips are requested in real time. So it's possible to track where the requests are coming from, when the requests are coming from. So it really does allow you to gauge a market and make decisions on what other services you want to provide in that market going forward. So this could also address the lack of midday service between Newburgh and Beacon. The lack of midday service is actually something we heard about in the passenger in the transit survey. The current shuttle, the current ferry did not provide midday service, and neither did the Newburgh Beacon Stewart shuttle. So having microtransit service on demand in both Newburgh and Beacon could allow, again, to gauge that midday service and to provide that midday service on demand.
Boris, can I ask
yes.
a question?
Sure.
Who provides the shuttle service right now between Beacon and Newburgh?
That is Leprechaun. Leprechaun is the contractor.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so this could create also an opportunity to just gauge the interest in microtransit as a model, because both Newburgh and Beacon do have local service. So what they did in Albany is they didn't, the zone where they implemented the microtransit service in Albany was a zone that had local fixed route service that was poorly performing. And rather than eliminating that poorly performing service, they left it in place for a while just to sort of see how people react to microtransit versus more traditional fixed route service. And the intent was, if people do migrate to microtransit service, then they would pull the local fixed route service. And you could do something similar here in Newburgh and in Beacon. If it's clear that people prefer microtransit as a model compared to some, maybe not all, but some of the lower performing routes, then maybe you could replace one with the other over time. If it again becomes clear that microtransit is preferred, you could even extend the service to Stewart Airport from Newburgh. Initially, we were not recommending it because we didn't want to cannibalize ridership on the Newburgh Beacon Stewart shuttle that exists to connect to the airport, but that is something that could be done in the future as well. Okay, any questions about microtransit service? Okay. So the next set of recommendations is related to what's called transit signal prioritization, or TSP. So TSP is the practice of providing transit vehicles with priority at signalized intersections. So the way that it works is if a transit vehicle is approaching an intersection and the light is red, that red phase will be shortened so that the green comes up sooner, so that the bus keeps on moving. And then on the other hand, if the intersection is already green, then that green can be extended to allow the bus to kind of squeeze through before they get a red phase. So there's two approaches to TSP. One is a passive approach, which is basically just timing your signals based on prevalent travel flow by time of day. So if the prevalent direction of congestion is, in the eastbound direction in the morning and the westbound direction in the afternoon, you can time your signal so that it provides more green time eastbound in the morning and more green time westbound in the afternoon, or north or south or whatever. It's really just, it's sort of a approach of just optimizing the signal by time of day. The other approach is called active TSP. So active TSP relies on detecting transit vehicles as they approach an intersection. and actually adjusting the signal timing dynamically to prioritize transit over other vehicles at the intersection. Active TSP is an evolving technology, so the goal eventually is to allow for visual identification of transit vehicles, but currently the technology does require transponders on vehicles and at intersections for it to work. So there are several places in Orange County where active TSP could work. The first here is in Newburgh, the New York Route 17K or Broadway intersection with Route 9W. So this is an area that has heavy congestion, especially during peak period, or did before COVID, obviously, peak period congestion between 4 and 5 p.m. The congestion mostly impacts northbound 9W and westbound Route 17K at this time. Coach USA operates through the intersection. They had 29 weekday trips going through that intersection. And then Newburgh local service and Newburgh Beacon Stewart Shuttle also operated through that intersection. So the proposed improvement includes active TSP, especially to manage left turn queues, left turn movement queues from 9W onto Broadway. So that's one location. Another location is County Road 15. This is in Deer Park at the intersection of US Route 6 and the I-84 interchange. Again, heavily congested, or it was before, between 4 and 5 p.m. It impacts Coach USA service. There's a Coach USA park and ride right here. I believe it's at this church. So the proposed improvements include active TSP, to permit signal preemption at Route 6. So basically on the CR County Road 15 corridor, both the intersection with Route 6 and the intersection with the I-84 ramps, those are places where we would recommend active TSP, as well as Route 6 at the I-84 westbound ramps. So that's over here. Okay. Another location is 9W at the I-84 interchange in Newburgh, mostly congested between 5 and 6. This is an area that's served by the Newburgh Beacon Stewart Shuttle. And Coach USA also operates through the area, but doesn't actually exit. It operates on I-84, doesn't exit onto 9W, but sometimes congestion does impact the main lanes as well. So the proposed improvements here include coordinating with NISDOT. NISDOT is actually already doing signal work. They may have actually already finished it, but they were doing signal work on Plank Road and North Plank Road. And basically the NISDOT has incorporated TSP into their long range plan. So what they're doing is they're making all signal work that they do, they're making it TSP ready. It doesn't mean that it is active as TSP, but they're installing the components that would allow for intersections to incorporate TSP when the time is right, just through sort of a plug-in of extra computer chip onto the motherboard of the controller at the signal. So in this case, it's a matter of coordinating with NISDOT on their existing signal work to incorporate TSP.
You know, Boris, one point, this is my neighborhood, this is where I live, where I grew up even. And the traffic changes from earlier time to now is dramatic.
Mm-hmm.
And the traffic going up 9W North is so bad sometimes that it actually backs up onto the Newburgh Beacon Bridge. It's a very, very heavily used corridor these days, both coming north and at the same time 4 to 5, 6 o'clock coming south into the city as well.
Also, in this case, it's gotten worse, not better, huh?
It's worse. I mean, they've done what you can with signalization, but it really is just a matter of how much capacity is going through those intersections at this time.
Mm. Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. So, and you said it's on 9W that you're seeing the greatest congestion now, not on.
Starting about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon,
Mm-hmm.
going both north and south, it is bumper to bumper almost. It's very, very thick.
Okay. The next location we have here is New York. This is in Newburgh, the New York 17K and I-84 interchange. Again, you know, peak period congestion was an issue prior to COVID. The congestion mostly impacted 17K. at Governor's, see, so this is Governor Drive right here. This is where you had congestion, and Lakeside Drive up here. This is where you had congestion. So Coach USA operated on this corridor with 5 trips per direction per day. The proposed improvements include TSP at those 2 intersections. And there was also congestion on the exit ramps as well. So there's a signal here, signal here, signal here, and signal here. All of those could benefit from TSP. And then we have the next one is New York Route 17K and the Route 300 at the I-84 and I-87 interchanges. This is quite a complicated junction, as you see. So there, Coach USA and Trailways, this is the park and ride here. This is that Newburgh park and ride here. So the recommendations include active TSP to permit signal preemption for buses at Route 300 at Auto Park Place Road. So that's right here, close to the park and ride. And then the intersection also, or sorry, that's this intersection and this intersection. So both of these intersections, the Auto Park Place Road and the Route 300, both of those intersections with 17K would be recommended for TSP. Okay. And then we have Route 208 at the I-84 interchange in Montgomery. Same peak period congestion issues, mostly impacts 208, as well as the exit ramps from I-84. So the proposed TSP would permit signal preemption for buses at the 208 intersection with Hawkins Drive, which is here, as well as the ramps here and here. All right, so then finally, the next set of capital improvement recommendations are related to park and rides. So again, park and ride capacity was an issue pre-COVID. At the Monroe Park and Ride, you have 2 lots already, and it's served by Coach USA. There's 689 spaces between these 2 lots. They were operating near capacity on a regular basis on weekdays prior to COVID-19. Vacant land currently exists next to this Lot B. It's sort of between Lot B and the Museum Village area. So there is vacant land. The problem is that this land is used occasionally for reenactments by the museum. So if some agreement could become, could be reached with the Museum Village, you could fit 323 additional spots into this area. Obviously now with the reduced demand, maybe that puts off kind of the schedule for when this would need to be considered, but there is room, there's physical room for expansion here. It's just a matter of coordinating with Museum Village. Also Chester Park and Ride. So this is one that came up repeatedly in the comments in the survey comments. The lot has 93 spaces. People now are parking at the Lowe's, which is across Somerville Way. So there is an opportunity, there is room for expanding the lot with an additional 179 spaces. This would require acquisition of this parcel. It's been approached before. NIZOT has they said that they've approached the owner before without success. Maybe now things have changed. Again, people's perspectives change with COVID and whatnot, but there is an opportunity to expand it if an agreement can be reached. And then finally, there's a park and ride, the Tuxedo Park and Ride, that also it's not a very, very large one. It has 73 spaces currently. There's an opportunity to expand that. There's some vacant property that exists adjacent to the service road south of 17A. It could provide for an additional 97 spaces. So for a total of 170 between the 2 lots. It would require acquisition of 1.5 acres of property as well. Okay, so I guess the last thing I wanted to mention is that we will be having a public meeting with this information as well as information from regarding Ulster County and Dutchess County also later this week. That'll be on the 10th at 6 p.m. There's a Zoom link that is it can be found on the project website, which is connectmidhudson.com. The meeting will be open to anyone that wishes to attend. It will also be recorded, and then the meeting will be posted to this website, connectmidhudson.com, on the 11th, along with a comment form for people to leave their feedback. And that's all I have for today.
Well, thank you, Boris. It's very, very informative. I was just on the last point about the public hearing. I would have Ashley call Justin Rodriguez in our office to make sure that we get out to the public the availability to view that hearing and participate, because I didn't know about it myself till just now.
Okay.
So,
Actually, on the Facebook page, Justin just posted something about it yesterday.
okay, well, maybe we should pump it up a little bit more too, so that those people that are interested in commenting have that opportunity.
Sure. Just Harry, so you know, it was also sent to all of the municipalities, like the clerks and the boards and the mayors and supervisors, as well as the OCTC contact list.
Okay, good. Boris, great presentation, a lot of stuff. I would just like to open it up right now to our membership. If anybody has any questions or comments, now's the time.
Boris, it's Alan Sorensen. With the Chester Park and Ride, I know there were two alternatives at one point. Have you narrowed it down to just the one, or is the other one still on the table?
So we eliminated the other one because there were additional expenses that were sort of potentially cost prohibitive. So there's some land here that's also undeveloped. It would require for this bridge to be rebuilt to access that plot of land, and because of that, it's something that was eliminated due to cost. It could, if the demand continues to grow over time, if this expansion is insufficient, then that is a possibility, but there's just an additional cost component to that.
Okay, because on the flip side of that, where the new lots proposed is also a viable development parcel. So, the owner may be reluctant to let that go. Where on the other side of that little channel there, because of that, it may be a practical alternative. So.
Yep. Anyone else have any comments? Any questions for Boris? If not, I must be getting a little tedious for everybody listening to me, but I do have a question.
Sure.
Again, I live in Newburgh, and I see every now and then a Ulster County bus going through and picking up passengers in Orange County. You didn't talk about the Dutchess and Ulster connection to Orange. Can you comment on that briefly? And where does that bus go once it leaves Newburgh and heads back up to Ulster?
So there is a, let me see if I can find a map to, hold on one second. Oh, hello? Hello, you guys there?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I just, my screen just went black.
Well, this is Rob. Harry, I can tell you the history of that bus quickly. That bus that comes down from UCAT was originally a Leicester Lines bus, if anyone remembers Leicester Lines back in the day, and they stopped their passenger service in 2004. And that one route, they had two routes. Leicester Lines had two routes that came into Newburgh from Ulster. One came from the hamlet of Walk Hill, and then there's this other route that connects to New Paltz. And when Leicester Lines went out, Ulster County took over that one route because of the connection to New Paltz. So that's the little bit of the history behind that route anyway.
Just to tell you how old I am, I took that Leicester Line run in the summer of '74 when I was doing my master's degree at New Paltz. I'd walk to the Newburgh bus station on Broadway from my home and then take the bus up to New Paltz. And it cost about 90 cents. Last century.
Well, sort of related to that. Let me make my screen bigger. When we had this meeting, a similar presentation for Orange County, and there was a request from the folks who live in this, southern Ulster County, they actually requested that this zone be expanded to include southern Ulster County, because they were saying that the kind of the commercial patterns of where people do their shopping and so on for southern Ulster County is actually more oriented toward Orange County than than Kingston or the northern part of Ulster County. So they made the recommendation of expanding this zone into Ulster County. The reason that we didn't recommend that initially was because from a funding perspective, we thought it would be a lot simpler to implement these zones if they were within each county's boundaries, because each county could take ownership and more easily potentially find funding sources for each of these zones. There are some exceptions, obviously, like the Newburgh Beacon one, which would be kind of jointly funded, but it's very half and half, versus if a zone was slightly extended into a neighboring county, then you'd have to figure out, well, how does the funding work? What's the proportion that's paid by one county? What's the proportion that's paid by the other? So initially we tried to simplify these zones as much as possible by limiting them to county boundaries. But there is a recognition of, I guess maybe what you were sort of alluding to, that there is travel between, even today, UCAT does provide service into Orange County.
And also, a lot of people in Newburgh work at Poughkeepsie.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a natural synergy there as well. Anybody else? Any questions for Boris? I would just ask then, Rob or Boris, where do we go now?
So I sent out a draft report to everybody. I think everybody on this call may have gotten that. We are, after we get through the public meetings, and we have one more meeting, it's called a PAC meeting, a Project Advisory Committee meeting on Thursday, and then the public meeting. After we get through those, we compile all the comments and then combine them with comments that we've gotten from the county staff on the draft final report. We revise the draft final report, and we submit that in its final form to the 3 counties. So that should be within about the next month or so.
Great. Okay, anyone else? Any questions for Boris or any comments? Any feedback on the presentation? Okay, Boris, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
We appreciate the work. Okay, our next item is reports from the OCTC staff. And Julie or Ashley, do you want to begin?
I don't have anything outstanding, Julie, unless you do.
No?
Yeah, no.
Travis?
Harry, I don't have anything else to add. Thank you.
Rob?
Nothing in particular, just, some of the dial bus services are starting to suspend service from here and now, different times due to, COVID starting to affect some of the different operations. So that's like a very fluid thing right now, which is expected due to what's going on. That's all I have right now.
Commissioner, are you on there? You have anything to report?
I'm on, nothing to add, Harry.
Okay. And how about other member reports? The Thruway Authority, are you with us tonight? Okay, MTA?
I am.
No, I
yeah,
have nothing to report. Thank you.
Okay. And who else am I missing? New York State DOT?
Nothing to report, Harry. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Anyone else? Any other comments from anyone? Hearing none, we'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you all. I appreciate this.
Thank you.
Ashley, Julie, good job. Rob, thank you.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you. Have a good day.